There are moments in life when the atmosphere changes before anything visible actually happens. Moments when your body senses the shift long before your mind can explain it. And this is one of those moments. Do not dismiss what you are feeling today as ordinary tension or emotional instability, because the energy surrounding May 12th is carrying far more force than most people realize. This is not simply another moon-changing signs. This is not one of those passing lunar moods that fades overnight and leaves no mark behind. At 8 at night on May 12th, the moon enters Aries. But what makes this transit different is the exact energetic doorway it is activating in the sky. Something ancient is being touched again, something that has been dormant beneath the surface of your life for months, waiting for the right trigger to wake it up. And if lately you have felt unable to relax, unable to settle into your routine, unable to keep pretending that everything in your life is acceptable, when deep down you know it is not. There is a reason for that pressure building inside you. You may have noticed yourself becoming impatient in situations where you once stayed silent. You may have caught yourself fantasizing about leaving behind old versions of yourself, old relationships, old limitations, without fully understanding why those feelings suddenly became so intense. What is happening now is not random emotional chaos. Your spirit has been preparing for impact long before this day arrived. The Aries moon is only the visible spark. The deeper story is about the point it touches when it enters Aries, because as the moon crosses into that first degree today, it activates what astrologers have called the world axis, a mathematically charged point in the heavens associated with collective destiny, turning points, and irreversible beginnings. The moment that lunar current reaches 0 degrees Aries, it becomes impossible to keep burying the truth about your life beneath distractions and survival patterns. Every hidden frustration begins demanding attention. Every abandoned desire suddenly feels alive again. Every dream you convinced yourself was unrealistic starts pushing back against the walls you built around it. This is why the energy feels so overwhelming right now. The universe is no longer whispering. It is confronting you directly. It is placing pressure on every place where fear has been controlling your decisions and asking whether you are finally willing to stop shrinking yourself to fit inside a life that no longer matches who you are becoming. And the intensity of this moment is amplified by how brief it actually is. The moon only remains in Aries for roughly 2.5 days, which means the energetic window connected to this activation is short, concentrated, and deeply consequential. The choices made during this period are not small emotional reactions. They become energetic declarations that shape the months ahead. The direction you move now, the truth you admit now, the action you finally take now, all of it carries momentum far beyond this week. That is why the awakening already feels underway. In reality, it began before today ever arrived. For many people, the build-up started days ago, maybe even longer. It may have shown up as a strange discomfort in your own skin, a feeling that your current reality suddenly feels too tight, too repetitive, too disconnected from the person you are trying to become. You may have felt yourself growing irritated with people you normally tolerate, or feeling emotionally charged over situations that once seemed manageable. Maybe your patience disappeared without warning. Maybe your dreams became unusually vivid, filled with arguments, confrontations, competition, or moments where you finally defended yourself after staying silent for too long. Maybe an intense urge to begin something new has been growing stronger every day, even if fear keeps telling you to wait for the perfect moment. All of these are signs that the Aries energy has already been moving through you. Lunar energy does not arrive instantly. It gathers pressure slowly, like a massive wave forming in the distance before it finally crashes onto shore. And that is exactly what this week has been building toward. By the time the moon officially enters Aries today, the emotional pressure reaches its breaking point. Everything trapped beneath the surface demands release. The frustration, the hunger, the courage, the anger, the desire to finally move, all of it rises at once. And most people are going to misunderstand what they are experiencing. They will assume they are simply stressed or emotionally unstable. They will try to suppress the discomfort with distractions, routines, and endless overthinking. They will feel the impulse to take bold action and immediately convince themselves to delay it because the timing does not feel safe enough yet. But what separates this moment for you is your ability to recognize what this energy is actually trying to do. The Aries Moon is not interested in keeping your life comfortable. It arrives to expose every place where you have been abandoning your own power. It reveals where you have accepted less than what your soul truly wants, where you have stayed quiet to avoid conflict, where you have waited for validation that was never going to arrive. And here is where the deeper layer of this transit becomes impossible to ignore. This moon is not entering just any point in Aries. It is returning to the exact same degree, 0 degrees Aries, where Saturn and Neptune came together earlier this year on February 20th. That conjunction already planted something enormous inside the collective psyche. Saturn brought reality, pressure, consequences, and structure. Neptune dissolved illusions, fantasies, confusion, and emotional fog. When those two forces merged at 0 degrees Aries, they created an energetic imprint connected to identity, destiny, and the rebuilding of personal truth. Now the moon is returning to awaken that dormant imprint emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. What you are feeling today is not only courage, it is recognition. Something inside you remembers the promise that was seeded during that earlier alignment, and now the emotional trigger has arrived to force movement. The part of you that has been sleeping can no longer remain asleep. And what happens next depends entirely on whether you choose fear or transformation. What makes this moment so extraordinary is not simply the moon entering Aries. It is the fact that this transit is reopening an astrological doorway that almost never gets touched. Earlier this year, on February 20th, Saturn and Neptune merged at 0 degrees Aries, creating one of the rarest alignments seen in centuries. An event tied to a point in the heavens that only becomes activated approximately every 35 to 36 years. That conjunction was not subtle energy. It represented the breakdown of outdated realities, the collapse of systems that could no longer sustain themselves, and the slow erosion of illusions people had spent years convincing themselves were permanent. Entire internal structures began dissolving beneath the surface during that period. Beliefs that once felt stable suddenly became questionable. Futures people assumed were guaranteed no longer felt certain. Emotional attachments weakened. Identities that once defined people began cracking under pressure. What happened then was not just collective. It was deeply personal, even if many people could not yet articulate why they felt so emotionally unsettled. Now, as the moon moves across that exact same degree on May 12th, all of that unfinished energy is being dragged directly into the emotional body. The moon acts like an activator, pulling massive generational currents out of the abstract and forcing them into immediate human experience. It is as if months of pressure have been building silently beneath your skin, waiting for one final trigger before release. That trigger is arriving now. This is why everything feels heightened. This is why normal routines suddenly feel unbearable. This is why your emotional reactions seem stronger than usual. The moon is not creating chaos for no reason. It is awakening the next stage of your evolution, and evolution never arrives comfortably. Real transformation demands movement. It demands risk. It demands choices your previous self would have avoided, because fear once felt safer than change. And one of the clearest signs this awakening has already begun is the anger you've been carrying lately. Not random irritation, not meaningless emotional instability, but a deep frustration that seems to rise every time you look at the parts of your life that no longer align with who you are becoming. You may have noticed yourself losing patience faster than usual. Situations you once tolerated now feel almost offensive to your spirit. Conversations feel exhausting. Compromise feels unbearable. Pretending feels impossible. The important thing to understand is that this anger is not the enemy. It is information. Aries is ruled by Mars, the planet connected to action, instinct, survival, assertion, and the raw force that pushes people to defend their existence. Right now, Mars is also moving through Aries, amplifying this lunar energy into something even more intense and impossible to ignore. But the deeper layer of this story is what Mars is approaching next. On May 16th, only days after the Moon passes through Aries, Mars forms an exact conjunction with Chiron. Chiron represents the deepest emotional wound carried within the psyche, especially the wound connected to identity, self-worth, rejection, and the fear that you are somehow too much or not enough to fully exist as yourself in the world. When Mars joins Chiron in Aries, astrologers often describe it as the wounded warrior archetype awakening. Suddenly, suppressed rage surfaces from beneath years of silence. Old humiliation returns. Buried resentment rises. Pain connected to self-expression becomes impossible to ignore. The anger you are feeling now is not just surface-level frustration. It is the emotional memory of every moment you were told to stay small. Every moment you silenced yourself to keep peace. Every moment you swallowed your truth because you feared rejection, abandonment, or conflict. It is the accumulated exhaustion of denying your own fire for the comfort of others. That is why your current circumstances suddenly feel intolerable. Your soul has reached a threshold where compromise no longer feels survivable. The fighting energy inside you exists because there is finally something your spirit recognizes as worth defending. Your identity, your future, your desires, your purpose, your right to take up space without apology. But this is where the crossroads appears, because this energy can move in two completely different directions. If handled unconsciously, it can explode outward into destruction. People may lash out impulsively, destroy relationships unnecessarily, create conflict without purpose, or burn down parts of their lives simply because they cannot contain the pressure any longer. But if handled consciously, this same energy becomes fuel. It becomes the force that finally gives you the courage to establish boundaries you were previously too afraid to enforce. It becomes the momentum needed to pursue goals you have postponed for months or even years. It becomes the strength required to stop abandoning yourself every time authenticity threatens your comfort zone. This is why the first fearless decision connected to this Aries Warrior Moon is so important. The universe is demanding that you stop waiting for approval before becoming who you already know you are. For too long, many people have shaped themselves according to what felt acceptable to others. They learned how to perform versions of themselves that kept them safe, liked, chosen, or emotionally protected. They adjusted their personalities to avoid criticism. They edited their desires to fit social expectations. They built lives based on external validation rather than inner truth. But the Saturn and Neptune conjunction earlier this year shattered many of those false identities. It exposed how fragile those external structures actually were. Relationships ended. Illusions dissolved. Certain dreams collapsed. Long-held assumptions about life no longer felt reliable. And although that process felt painful, it was not designed to punish you. It was designed to remove what was false so something authentic could finally emerge underneath. The danger now is that many people will panic after those old structures collapse and immediately search for new illusions to replace them. They will enter new situations that drain them in slightly different ways. They will create new performances instead of embracing truth. They will continue sacrificing themselves for approval while convincing themselves they are evolving. The Aries Moon interrupts that cycle completely. It demands honesty. It asks whether you are finally ready to stop building your identity around the expectations of people who cannot define your destiny. This is the energy of stepping into the unknown, like the fool in the tarot. Not because certainty exists, but because remaining trapped inside a false version of yourself has become more painful than the fear of change itself. And that does not mean reckless destruction or impulsively abandoning every responsibility overnight. It means consciously choosing to value truth over comfort, growth over familiarity, and authenticity over social acceptance. It means recognizing that your soul can no longer survive inside a life built entirely around other people's expectations, and understanding that the path forward begins the moment you stop apologizing for who you really are. The deeper question this Aries Moon is forcing you to confront is not simply whether you are unhappy with your current circumstances, but whether you have been actively shaping your life at all, or merely reacting to whatever appears in front of you. That realization can feel uncomfortable, because many people suddenly discover they have spent years responding to pressure instead of consciously choosing direction. They adapted to situations instead of creating them. They survived rather than lived. They waited for certainty before moving, waited for validation before speaking, waited for perfect timing before taking action, and in the process, they slowly disconnected from the part of themselves that once felt bold, instinctive, and fully alive. But the energy of Aries does not operate that way. The warrior archetype does not stand frozen at the edge of transformation, waiting for every answer to appear first. It moves before certainty exists. It trusts that understanding reveals itself through action rather than endless analysis. The first step always comes before clarity. That is why this moon feels so urgent. It is attempting to break the psychological paralysis that fear has created inside so many people. Yet before you move forward with this energy, there is something extremely important you need to recognize. Because every powerful force carries a shadow, and the Aries Moon is no exception. If this energy is handled unconsciously, it can create destruction instead of liberation. Aries rules instinct, impulse, and immediate reaction. At its lowest expression, that same fire that inspires courage can quickly become recklessness. The emotional pressure building now can tempt people to make explosive decisions simply because intensity feels unbearable. Some may suddenly want to destroy relationships, quit jobs impulsively, lash out at loved ones, or create chaos just to feel temporarily free from emotional confinement. The shadow of Aries is the inability to pause before acting. It is the hunger to win at all costs. It is the mentality that prioritizes personal desire without considering consequence. When warrior energy loses consciousness, it stops becoming purposeful strength and starts becoming uncontrolled force. That is why awareness is critical during this transit. Pay attention to the moments where your emotions begin moving faster than your wisdom. Notice if you feel an overwhelming urge to prove yourself, dominate conversations, or react aggressively simply because you feel emotionally cornered. The desire to burn everything down may feel empowering in the moment, but impulsive destruction rarely creates lasting freedom. The real lesson of this moon is not about chaotic rebellion. It is about disciplined courage. It is about learning the difference between acting from truth and reacting from emotional overflow. There is a profound difference between healthy assertion and uncontrolled aggression. One creates clarity. The other creates regret. The highest expression of the Aries warrior does not fight simply to release anger. It fights to protect what is meaningful. It acts from conviction rather than emotional volatility. It knows exactly what deserves energy and what does not. That is the version of this energy you are being asked to embody now. And this understanding becomes even more important as the second fearless decision begins to emerge through the approaching Mars and Chiron conjunction. Because beneath the surface of your current frustration lives something even deeper, something older, something that has quietly shaped your identity for years without you fully realizing it. Most people spend their lives hiding their wounds. They bury painful memories beneath distractions. They pretend their scars no longer affect them. Or they allow those wounds to unconsciously control every choice they make, turning fear into the invisible architect of their entire life. They avoid risks because rejection once hurt too deeply. They silence themselves because criticism once shattered their confidence. They make themselves emotionally smaller because at some point being fully visible felt dangerous. But the Mars and Chiron conjunction in Aries offers another possibility entirely. It offers transformation. It offers the opportunity to turn pain into fuel instead of prison. Chiron represents the deepest emotional injury carried within the psyche, especially the wounds connected to identity, worthiness, visibility, and the right to exist authentically. Mars brings force, movement, courage, and activation to whatever it touches. When these two energies meet in Aries, the result is deeply personal. Old pain surfaces, not to punish you, but to reveal where your hidden strength has been waiting all along. Think about the experiences that shaped you most profoundly. Maybe it was rejection that taught you to question your value. Maybe it was constantly feeling unseen or emotionally dismissed. Maybe people made you believe you were too emotional, too intense, too ambitious, too different, or somehow fundamentally not enough. Perhaps there has always been a quiet fear living beneath your confidence, a fear that if people truly saw the real version of you, they would abandon you, criticize you, or attack you for it. Those experiences do not disappear simply because time passes. They remain stored in the nervous system, quietly influencing behavior, limiting self-expression, and teaching people to stay safe instead of fully alive. The Aries Moon is exposing exactly where those hidden wounds still hold power over your life. But instead of asking you to hide them again, it asks something radically different. It asks you to use them consciously, not as weapons of revenge, not as proof of victimhood, but as sources of wisdom, empathy, resilience, and purpose. Because the same experiences that hurt you also sharpened your awareness. They taught you how pain feels. They deepened your understanding of human vulnerability. They showed you what emotional abandonment looks like, which means you now understand the importance of presence, compassion, and authenticity more deeply than most people ever will. Your scars carry intelligence. They contain survival. They reveal how strong you had to become just to keep going. And the fearless decision arriving now is the choice to stop hiding those scars, as if they're evidence of weakness. Instead, you begin recognizing them as proof that you endured experiences that could have broken you completely, yet somehow you survived anyway. That survival changes people. It forges depth. It creates emotional steel beneath the surface. This is the essence of the spiritual warrior archetype, awakened by the Mars and Chiron alignment. Not the warrior obsessed with domination or ego, but the one who transforms suffering into wisdom, the one who has experienced darkness intimately and still chooses healing over bitterness, the one who understands pain deeply enough to meet others with compassion instead of cruelty, the one who could have become hardened by life but instead became more conscious because of it. Today is not simply about feeling powerful. It is about deciding what kind of power you want to embody moving forward. Will your wounds continue defining your limitations, or will they become the very source of your purpose? Because the third decision approaching next is the one that ultimately determines which future you step into from here. The final decision, hidden inside this Aries moon, is the one most people will completely overlook, and that is exactly why it becomes the most important of all. When this kind of fiery Aries energy floods the emotional body, people naturally become hyper-focused on themselves, their freedom, their independence, their personal desires, their need to reclaim control over their own lives. The instinct becomes intensely individualistic. There is a powerful temptation to believe that strength means emotional distance, that self-sovereignty means needing no one, that true power is proven through isolation. Many people under this transit may suddenly feel the urge to detach from everyone around them, convincing themselves they can only become fully free if they walk through life completely alone. But this is where the hidden trap begins to emerge. The shadow expression of the warrior archetype believes vulnerability is weakness. It believes connection creates dependency. It assumes relationships inevitably lead to sacrifice, compromise, or betrayal of the self. And when that fear takes over, people begin building emotional walls instead of healthy boundaries. They confuse self-protection with self-isolation. But the cosmos is already revealing that this is not the direction this energy is ultimately trying to take you. The timing of the upcoming transits makes that incredibly clear. Immediately after the Aries Moon, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. On May 16th, the new moon arrives in Taurus, bringing grounded Earth energy focused on stability, resources, embodiment, and long-term security. Then on May 18th, both Mars and Venus move into new signs, while the moon enters Cancer, a sign deeply connected to emotional nourishment, protection, belonging, and intimacy. These shifts are not random. Together, they create a message. The universe is showing you that authentic independence is not about cutting yourself off from human connection. True sovereignty means becoming secure enough within yourself that you can remain fully connected to others without abandoning who you are. And that realization leads directly into the third fearless decision. You are being asked to pioneer a completely different way of existing, one that rejects the false belief that you must choose between freedom and connection. Too many people believe they can either protect their individuality or maintain relationships, but not both. They assume that being fully themselves will cost them love, or that staying connected requires constant self-sacrifice. The Aries Moon is challenging that entire framework. It asks whether you are finally ready to hold two truths simultaneously. That your needs matter, and other people's needs matter too. That you deserve space to grow, and so do the people around you. That you can honor your own truth without diminishing someone else's humanity. This is the most difficult of the three decisions, because it requires emotional maturity instead of emotional reaction. It requires balance instead of extremes. Anyone can isolate. Anyone can disappear emotionally when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. Anyone can convince themselves they do not need support. But it takes real inner strength to remain emotionally open while still protecting your identity. The evolved warrior understands this. They do not destroy relationships every time conflict appears. They do not dominate people simply to feel powerful. They know how to establish boundaries without becoming cruel. They pursue their goals without dehumanizing others in the process. They understand when solitude is necessary and when support is essential. Most importantly, they stop treating emotional intimacy like a threat to their freedom. That is the deeper healing this Aries Moon is trying to initiate within you. As all this fire energy intensifies today, pay close attention to the relationships in your life. Notice where fear may be pushing you toward unnecessary separation. Ask yourself honestly whether certain bridges truly need to be burned, or whether your instinct to disconnect is actually an attempt to avoid vulnerability. Sometimes people sabotage meaningful relationships not because the connection is unhealthy, but because being truly seen feels terrifying. Authentic connection demands honesty. It demands emotional exposure. It demands that you reveal your needs, your fears, your desires, and your imperfections without hiding behind performance. For many people, that level of openness feels far more frightening than isolation ever could. But here is the truth this transit is trying to reveal. The bravest thing you can do is not abandoning everyone and proving you can survive alone. The bravest thing is remaining fully yourself while staying emotionally connected. It is allowing people to know the real version of you without shrinking, performing, or pretending. It is learning how to exist inside relationships without betraying your identity. When you finally commit to both freedom and connection simultaneously, something extraordinary begins to form. You stop splitting yourself into separate identities. You no longer become one version of yourself when alone, and another version around other people. You begin creating a life where every part of you can exist honestly at the same time. That kind of authenticity is rare, and it changes everything. But there is another layer to this cosmic sequence that you also need to understand, because Aries energy alone is never enough to sustain transformation. Aries is cardinal fire. It is extraordinary at beginnings. It initiates movement. It breaks through fear. It creates momentum, powerful enough to shatter stagnation. But sustaining that momentum is another challenge entirely. Fire burns intensely, but quickly. Without grounding, without patience, without structure, it eventually exhausts itself. That is why the cosmic timing unfolding now is so precise. The Aries moon arrives first to awaken courage, to ignite desire, and to push you into action. But immediately afterward, the universe shifts into Taurus energy to stabilize what Aries begins. The new moon in Taurus on May the 16th asks whether you are willing to build something lasting instead of chasing temporary emotional highs. Mars, entering Taurus on May 18th, redirects warrior energy away from impulsive reaction and toward persistence, endurance, and practical follow-through. These transits together reveal a truth many people fail to understand. Transformation is not created by one dramatic emotional breakthrough. It is created through consistent action after the breakthrough occurs. Many people feel inspired during Aries transits. They make bold declarations. They suddenly change direction. They chase intensity because it feels empowering in the moment. But then the emotional fire fades, and because no real foundation was built underneath the excitement, everything slowly collapses back into old patterns. This is why lasting change requires more than courage. It requires commitment. The Aries moon may awaken you, but staying awake demands discipline. It demands that you take the vision born in fire and ground it into everyday reality. The real transformation begins after the emotional intensity passes, when no one is watching, when motivation fluctuates, when the glamorous feeling disappears, and only the work remains. That is the stage where most people stop. But the people who truly evolve are the ones who continue anyway. They take the momentum created by this Aries activation and slowly turn it into structure, routine, boundaries, healing, and long-term growth. So understand this clearly. The energy of today is not the destination. It is the ignition point. The decisions you make now open the door, but what happens afterward depends entirely on whether you are willing to sustain what you started. And before this day fully unfolds, there is one final warning you need to hear, because misunderstanding this energy could change everything that follows. Do not underestimate what is arriving with this Aries moon, because this energy was never designed to comfort you. It does not move slowly. It does not ask politely for your attention. It does not wait until you feel emotionally prepared before demanding change. The moment the moon crosses into Aries and activates that powerful world axis point in the sky, something inside you is going to respond whether you consciously choose it or not. You will feel it physically before you can fully explain it mentally. Your body may become restless, unable to fully relax no matter how hard you try. There may be an electric pressure moving through your nervous system, a feeling that something is building beneath the surface and refusing to stay contained any longer. Sitting still may suddenly feel impossible. Routine may begin feeling unbearable. You may notice a sharp increase in emotional sensitivity, frustration, or agitation toward anything in your life that feels restrictive, repetitive, dishonest, or emotionally suffocating. Situations you once tolerated without question may suddenly feel impossible to endure for another second. Emotionally, this transit can feel like a fire spreading through every suppressed part of your inner world. Anger may rise unexpectedly. Impatience may intensify. Deep frustration connected to old limitations may finally demand acknowledgement. But beneath all of those emotions is something even more important: clarity. Sudden, undeniable awareness about what can no longer continue. Awareness about what needs to end. Awareness about what your spirit has been craving to begin for a very long time. That is the true power of this activation. It strips away denial. It exposes where your life has become disconnected from your truth. And once you see that clearly, you arrive at a crossroads that cannot be ignored. In that moment, you will face two very different paths. One path is unconscious reaction. That path is driven entirely by emotional overwhelm. It leads people toward impulsive distraction, reckless conflict, emotional explosions, and decisions made purely to escape discomfort without considering consequence. Under the pressure of this moon, some people will lash out at others, sabotage important relationships, destroy opportunities, or burn down entire areas of their lives simply because the intensity inside them feels impossible to contain. But the second path is entirely different. The second path is conscious response. It is the decision to use this Aries fire intentionally rather than destructively. It is the willingness to let this energy awaken courage instead of chaos. And that conscious response is rooted in the three fearless decisions this entire transit has been trying to lead you toward. The first is ending the habit of waiting for external permission before becoming who you truly are. The second is transforming your pain into purpose instead of allowing your wounds to define your limitations. The third is learning how to remain fully connected to others without abandoning yourself in the process. These are not abstract spiritual concepts meant to sound inspiring for a moment before being forgotten. These are energetic demands emerging directly from the cosmic patterns unfolding now. The people who answer those demands honestly are going to experience profound movement over the coming months. Certain doors that once felt permanently closed will begin opening unexpectedly. Opportunities aligned with their authentic path will start appearing with greater clarity. Confusion will begin dissolving. Momentum will increase. They will notice that the more honestly they live, the more life itself begins responding differently around them. But the people who resist this activation, the people who cling to comfort, denial, emotional avoidance, or outdated versions of themselves, will likely remain trapped inside the same repeating cycles they have already outgrown. They will continue encountering the same frustrations, the same limitations, the same emotional stagnation, while wondering why nothing in their life ever truly changes. Because this moon is not rewarding passive waiting anymore. The warrior archetype awakened by Aries energy does not require fearlessness before taking action. In fact, courage almost never arrives first. Real courage is created through movement. The warrior acts while fear is still present. The warrior steps forward before certainty exists. That is the lesson this transit is demanding you understand now. This moment is not simply another emotional wave passing through your life. It is a threshold, a dividing line between the version of yourself built around survival and the version of yourself ready to live with greater truth, greater courage, and greater authenticity. The question standing before you now is painfully simple, but life-changing in its consequences. Will you continue settling for a life that keeps your spirit emotionally confined? Or will you finally begin claiming the life your soul has been trying to move toward all along? The answer to that question will shape far more than this week. It will echo through every decision, relationship, opportunity, and transformation that follows from here. That is why this moment matters. That is why your response matters. Choose carefully. Choose consciously. Choose with the understanding that your future is being influenced by the level of honesty you are willing to embody right now. And if you have stayed with this message all the way to the end, know that your presence here was not meaningless. Something inside you recognized this energy before your mind fully understood it. If this message resonated with you, and if you want to continue exploring these deeper astrological shifts and spiritual awakenings together, consider subscribing and becoming part of this growing community. Your support genuinely means more than you realize. And if you feel called to do so, share your thoughts and experiences in the comments, especially how this Aries Moon energy is already showing up in your life and what fearless decisions you feel ready to make moving forward. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay conscious with your energy, and stay connected for more insight into the powerful cosmic changes still unfolding ahead.